welcome to part 2 of the December 2022 Ottawa User Group meeting. Wow, okay, that was awesome. Now we're going to dive into best practices of business analysis with my friend Marcus Udokang. Marcus, did you want to just take it over and introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen. Hope I can.
It's looking good here. Yep.
Oh dear, what did I do? Oh, just a moment here. Great. Fantastica. Splendid. Okay. Yes, my name, as was mentioned earlier, is Marcus Udokang, and I'm going to talk today about process modeling. And Ian referred to the planning side of business analysis, and that's really what my presentation is about. I guess I should say, first and foremost, welcome. I hear that members of the Ottawa Salesforce Users Group are not just from Ottawa, but from other parts of the world. So certainly welcome from wherever you are in the world. All right. Now, why do we need process models? When do we need process models? How do we build process models? And really, what's in it for you anyway? It's all about planning. Because like Ian mentioned, before you decide to create that one field, you have to understand why you're creating that one field. So to answer some of these questions and a few other questions today, let's look at 3 areas. We're going to look at what is business process management, just briefly, and then we're going to talk about business process modeling, and we're going to look at a process design approach. And I'm going to give a couple of examples of how I built some process diagrams. Before we do that, I have a question for you. I'm going to plop it into the chat if I may. Let me see. This is just for a bit of fun. If you click on that link, it'll take you to Mentimeter. And I would like to know, when we say process modeling, what comes to mind for everyone? You can type in up to 3 answers or more. You type in one word, press submit, and type in your second word and press submit. And I'm just curious to know what people think that process modeling is all about. Innovation is one answer. So far, so good. Anyone, any other takers on it? Participation, by the way, will give you some money at the end of the show. I mean, I'm only kidding. All right, business, pictures, innovation, red tape. Red tape. Yeah, there's a bit of red tape there. Anything else? Any other takers? What is, when we say process modeling, what comes to mind? Visual mapping, splendid. We've got what people do. That could mean a number of things. Any other ideas come to mind? Visual map, user experience, very much so. By the way, I hope that I'm audible enough that everyone can hear me. All right, thanks, Andy. Okay, so we've got a few terms up here, and we can certainly plot back to this screen a bit later on. But for the meantime, let's get back to the slideshow. Now, what is process modeling? Well, before we answer that specific question, let's just briefly look at business process management and where business analysis falls into all that. I will be making some references to the BABIC, the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge. And for those who don't know about it, the new Salesforce Business Administration certification has been based a lot on BABIC, or at least quite a bit of it has been. So let me give you an idea of what BABIC looks like. Now, this is BABIC. This is the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge. It's been created by the International Institute of Business Analysis, known as IIBA, and it's a whopping huge text, and it certainly isn't bedtime reading. But what it does do is it gives you some principles, some ideas about concepts, and some of those I will be talking about today. So as I make reference to BABIC, sometimes I've got the pages highlighted in orange, as you see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen here. Let me get back to this screen. So I've got BABIC 1.2, for example, in the bottom right-hand of this screenshot. So let's look at what is business analysis, right? In BABIC 1.2, chapter 1.2, says that it's the practice of enabling change in an enterprise. And we do so by defining needs, we do so by recommending solutions, and by delivering value. So that's really to our stakeholders. So that's really what business analysis is all about: defining needs, recommending solutions, and delivering value to your stakeholders. But business analysis can also be strategic. It can be operational. And it's all about this idea, this concept of continuous improvement. And business analysis, or business analysts, can do what we call current state diagrams and future state diagrams. And these two sets of diagrams are a way of planning, a way of creating requirements, if you will, to give us a visual concept of what today's system looks like and what tomorrow's system is going to look like when we create change in an organization. So it's all about understanding, I think, the current context of a problem and how we're going to try and solve that problem by implementing change. Now, BABIC 2.1 also says that the organization articulates their needs. So the business analyst is going to get all this information from the organization. We're going to get the idea of a solution design from the organization, and we're going to basically document these outcomes in business analysis documents of some sort, right? So that's what you bring to the table as a BA. We're defining needs, we're recommending solutions, we're delivering value as best we can. Now, what about business process management? Again, there's references to BABIC chapters that I have in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. But when you talk about business process management, part of that is building a process model. It's this visual way to try and convey information, right? And we start with this communication in mind. We have an idea of shared understanding with our stakeholders, and it allows us to analyze, allows us to refine this elicitation process, right? And we're going to put our requirements, we're going to put our designs into place based on this elicitation information that we get from our stakeholders. So in a sense, this process diagram, this business process management, is a way to represent the flow of activities, for example, in an organization, or the sequence of actions, or the sequence of events that take place, all represented in that process model. So in the context of, say, an organization's strategy, how are we going to create this process diagram? I mean, why is change needed? And how does it really benefit this organization? So this will help you define that current state, and it's going to help you shape that future state. Now, let's take a look at process modeling. There's just a brief example of it in this screenshot here. But again, making a quick reference to this BABIC, process modeling, it's all about creating standards, right? This graphical model is going to give us an idea of how our standard for this particular process is carried out, right? And it's going to help us document operational procedures, obviously, too. It's going to show us how work is aligned amongst different stakeholders. It gives us an idea to be able to understand the relationships between different processes. And it's going to tell us, it's going to sort of describe what occurs or what will occur during a certain process, right? It's going to help us detect and fix problems. It's going to help us refine or streamline our process flow. And it's helping us to describe the context of this solution that we're trying to solve, right? Now, I have one more question for you folks, again, in the chat. Let me see if I can get the chat back up. And we'll go back to the next question at hand. And I'm curious if any of you out there create business process diagrams. A quick yes or no will suffice. And you should be able to, most people create business process diagrams out there. All right. Nobody says no. So I'm under the assumption that everyone here has an idea of how to build a business process diagram, more or less. At least we like to think we all do. All right. So that's a quick answer. Well, I'm going to the assumption that 100% of people here know how to build process diagrams. All right. Now, Just going to move ahead here if I can quickly. This is another good example of a screenshot of a business process diagram, just a simple one. And we need to be able to look at what an excellent business process is, right? So what are you going to consider? Well, we know that a process is comprised of a series of events and functions. We know all this stuff. But this diagram really is there to connect processes, connect functions. We've got events and roles. We've got data. We've got logical execution of that data. It's all sort of come together in one diagram, if you will. So this connectivity is very critical to achieving what we'd like to think of as an excellent business process, right? So there's technical characteristics on how you can present this process diagram, but there's also a physical characteristic. You need to be able to make sure that that diagram is clear and understandable to those who are going to use it, or those who are going to read it. Now, this is an example of an as-is diagram, which I built at the last contract I was at. And to draw process maps, obviously, you can use a number of different software out there. There's Visio, there's Lucid Chart if you're in the Apple world. And I think I might be able to show you an example of Xmind. Xmind is one that I particularly use. You can purchase it if you want to on a 6-month or annual plan, but there's also a free model. So you can download this and use it for free. The only difference between the free model and the paid version is that the free model, you can't really create PDF files with it. It gives you a watermark of the word Xmind across it. So if you don't want the watermark, you have to pay a bit of money for that. Anyhow, it's good to know what type of softwares are out there to help you build diagrams like these. I want to start by explaining clarity and readability on these diagrams. You'll notice that each of these boxes are about the same size. We are going from the left to the right, or we go from top to bottom, and we've got a little start button and an end button represented in green. And well, we need an effective element of white space as well. And the layout, you'll see the layout, how it's not mangled. It looks clear. There's swim lanes, there's 3 swim lanes, and each swim lane represents a department, a horizontal swim lane. So the red at the top represents the human resources department in this case. We've got the middle in yellow, which represents an IT department, and in blue represents as the security department at this particular organization. This diagram, I can probably give you a better version of it. This is a larger piece of it. This diagram is quite interesting, this as-is diagram, because it's all about onboarding an employee in this particular event business. This is what they're into. And they create, when you onboard an employee, they create a time clock card for the employee. At least the HR department does that. That's what's in red. And they use a software called UKG Pro. It's a cloud app for onboarding employees. Now, we also have in blue, when you onboard this employee, you also give them a security card, a door access card. So there's 2 different cards, one created by HR to clock in your time, and another card given to you by security to allow you into certain doors in this organization. And the IT department helps to support these two departments. It helps to support security, and it helps to support HR. And it's a very simple flow in this current state. How do we come across getting this information to create this diagram? Well, we'll talk about that a bit later. In this process, I used a few interviews, and there's a number of questions that you really want to be able to ask your stakeholders to be able to gather this information. So we'll go over that briefly as well. This is the to-be diagram. And this is what the process will look like in the future. And we know that process modeling, it's all about providing information that's interconnected, right, between different departments, as we've done here. And it's a shared document that many other users are going to see, including executives, including your manager. So it has to be in a language that's understandable at all levels. It's all about collaborating with stakeholders. It's all about showing the context of the problem and what that solution can provide you. But most importantly, when you create this document, you're going to have to reuse it in the future. So it's going to be able to save you time, effort, and cost in having to rebuild this diagram. So that's why it's very important to create an element of version control. Save your documents, version 1, version 2, and so on and so forth, so you can go back and have this historical view of things. Now, this particular 2B diagram, this is a larger version of it, involves a number of things. There's an element of automation that's now taken place in the 2B diagram. We want an employee to be hired, onboard them, and give them one card. That's the objective of this 2B diagram. We don't want to give them 2 cards. Right now, we have a card from HR for time clock access, and we have a card from security for door access. We don't want these 2 cards. We only want one. So that's what this process diagram explains. But we also need one person, not 2 people, to support this. We need the HR department to support it, not HR and security. So we're trying to refine the process of onboarding, if you will. We want the HR software to be able to talk to the security software. We want to be able to say we've onboarded someone, we've given them a card access for the time clock access, and oh, by the way, Mr. Security, we also are going to create the security information, the door access information, and put them onto one card. And right now, this event company hires 3,000 people every summer. Imagine we will now have to manually send an email, 3,000 emails to security and say, we've just hired this person, can you please create a card? We've just hired another person, it's Tuesday, can you create another card? You can imagine there's a lot of work that goes into this. So we want to be able to automate this process. And to do so, one of the VPs for Salesforce went off and created a company called Okta. And Okta is a cloud-based company like Salesforce, and it helps to connect different softwares together. So Okta now enables this HR software and this security software to talk to one another. It also talks to Salesforce, by the way. And that's exactly what we do at this company. We have a number of volunteers that are stuck in a Salesforce database, and we can also create a security or a door access card for them as well. So that's what this 2B diagram has helped us develop. You'll notice that each of these boxes starts with a verb, and I put the verb on a separate line. So we've got find profile, check Okta user profile, assign apps to user groups, and so on and so forth. There's a degree of clarity and consistency in these diagrams as well. So the end result is that now the IT department only has to support one department, HR. And a lot of this stuff in purple is our automation piece, which I've been able to document as well. We've also been able to delete a few boxes that existed on the as-is diagram, and we've created a few new ones at the same time. How do you come up with these 2 diagrams? How do you come up with the information that you're going to put into these diagrams to be able to explain the context of the problem that you're trying to solve? Well, there are many types of techniques and methodologies in process analysis, and the scope and the purpose of a project will help you sort of determine which techniques, which methodology you're going to use, and how rigorously you're going to follow them. But this screenshot shows what we call a SIPOC or SIPOC, suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, and customers. And you can enter the valuable data that you need in each of these sections, and this can help you create these process steps. As you can see, the suppliers creates a step called a create profile, and inputs, you've got a whole bunch of information that enables you to select the items to purchase and so on and so forth. This is just the process for purchase order. So this SIPOC diagram, it shows that flow between a problem, its opportunities, the gaps, the root causes, and so on and so forth. It allows you to understand those suppliers, those inputs, those customers, and the process that's involved from, from end to end. But let's take a look at a process design approach. By the way, are there any questions so far up to this point? So we've got an as-is, we've got a to-be diagram, we've got one way that we can start to develop, the plan to develop that as-is diagram. Now we're going to look at a design approach to put the whole thing together.
Marcus, can you explain what 2B is standing for?
Okay, so a to-be is how your system will look in the future.
Oh, I'm picturing the numeral, like number 2 and then B. Gotcha.
How it's going to be in the future versus as is, how it is currently now. All right. So we want to be able to look at how to gather requirements for business process modeling. And how long does it take to do a process? Well, we're going to ask our stakeholders to start off with, ask your stakeholders, give me an idea of your approach and philosophy, as well as the steps that you follow. So that's a good way to start. And there are really 3 big things at hand here. One is standards drive process and requirements. And process drives more requirements. And best industry practice also drives both process and standards. So first, we want to be able to seek to understand what this organization does today and why. So we've got to learn how their system works today. We've got to be able to start by reviewing their current documentation on relevant standards, on their relevant processes. We've got to look at different departments and see how they run their processes. We've got to learn how to use their current systems, whether that's Salesforce, or whether that's Okta or UKG Pro, whatever it is they use. We've got to be able to understand how their current process is working today. We've got to be able to reference the standards that you believe influence the process design. And we also know that we've got to be able to share our findings in that group of stakeholders, amongst that group of stakeholders. So we're asking questions like, well, what do you do today? Why do you do what you do? What are the pain points in the process today? What's the root cause of these pain points? And what are all the standards that follow? What are the gaps that are in those standards, and so on and so forth? Many stakeholders may not even realize that problems exist. So the business analyst is really there to be able to see these contradictions and pull them out. You've got to be able to meet with those business units, either before a workshop or during a workshop, and you've got to be able to informally try to understand what it is they do today, what their pain points are, and how you're going to help solve their problems. And these are some of the questions that can help you build that initial as-is, that first current system diagram. There's also an author by the name of Howard Podeswa. He's from Toronto, and he's written a book called The Business Analyst's Handbook. I've got a screenshot from that book here. And what Howard Podeswa does is he gives you an idea of the types of questions you're going to be able to ask stakeholders. In this case, when you're building a business process diagram, he's listed a few sample questions in chapter 2 of his book on page 69. So some of the questions he asks: what's the current as-is workflow? What are the problems or the bottlenecks or inefficiencies with this current workflow? Are all the participants in the end-to-end process accounted for? What's the role of each of these participants? And which participant carries out each activity in the workflow? You're going to take the responses from, say, your SIPUC, your supplier input diagram, or you're going to take the responses from your interview questions, and it's going to help you build a mind map. And this is what a mind map might look like for those of you who don't know. Here it is in full view. And this is a mind map that I built at a former contract I was in, trying to understand what it is that IT department does, or their IT department does. You can create a similar mind map with for this as-is diagram too. This is quite a large diagram, and this is in Xmind, the Xmind software. When you print it out in PDF, it looks like this is the PDF version of it. So that gives you an idea of what the mind map should look like. But most importantly, mind mapping is a form of note-taking. It's going to help us articulate, it's going to help us capture ideas in this non-linear diagram. And it uses images, we've got words, different colors, We've got these connected relationships, and it gives us a form of structure, a form of logic to our ideas. But most of all, a mind map really provides the central idea. And we've got, in the case of this mind map, that central idea is information technology. And then we've got little subtopics like documentation and process modeling and so on and so forth. So you've got topics, main idea, you've got topics, and you've got subtopics, right? And you want to be able to capture all of that on one page. So mind maps really help us think through maybe complex problems. It allows us to explore different relationships in an organization, and it helps us creatively think about solving a specific problem.
Marcus, can I interrupt?
Sure, go ahead.
Can you just go back to the mind map?
Sure.
So can you just take one example and just sort of walk through it? So something simple,
Okay.
because I'm having a difficult time.
So for example, I wanted to be able to understand here in the information technologies department, what were, in this case, what were some of the projects that we're doing? Well, we had a point of sale system we were building. We had a midway system. We had an accreditation system that we were building, and so on and so forth. Documentation that had to be done for standards templates, for a wiki. So that's one. Those are a set of projects that the IT department does. Where our main topic is IT. Our subtopic is our main idea is IT. Our topic is projects, and all the subtopics that follow. I wanted to have an idea of what the foundations of the business services department happen to do. Well, they look into scope of work, they look into an IT support model, and so on and so forth. And Mike's vision of how we do this. Mike was a guy on our team.
Okay, so stop right there now.
Yep.
So where did you sort of get the ideas of, okay, projects, foundations of business? Like, where did all of that, how did that get?
Okay, so what happened was, this is an idea of interview questions, for example, I take from Howard Podesso's book. I sat down with my manager, and when I first got hired, and I wanted to have an idea of what their IT company does. And this was the map that I built for myself, really, to give me a better understanding of how the department operates. So most of these ideas came from the IT manager. And part of my job was to go to the different departments and get an idea of how those departments operate currently. So I created a similar diagram for each of the departments.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Kevin, just if I can just jump in and add on to this just a little tiny bit. I once had a role as a box office manager for a festival, and I used a mind map similar to this, especially when I first came on, because I didn't know what I was doing. And I used it to capture all the different elements of my job that I had to approach, whether it was pre-sales or venue checks or staffing. And I, I essentially made like the ultimate to-do list from a mind map, but it was a lot easier for me to be able to categorize the different areas, and then I could see it. I could see the whole thing in one, and gradually start checking off the elements that were completed. So
I think
really,
that's a good word, categorize. It helps you categorize the functions in each department, for example.
yeah.
Or it helps you categorize what your job role is in a visual form without going into deep detail, right? Just the highlights of it. Yeah, thanks, Sandy. That's a good explanation. I got to use that next time. Categorize. Now, when we're grabbing this information that we're sucking from our stakeholders' minds, we're trying to seek to understand what the organization is not doing, but should be doing as per best industry practice, for example, right? It's just as important to stand back and look at this as-is diagram process and how things are done today, but we have to ask ourselves, what are they not doing today and that they should be doing? So we're going to ask why they're not doing these things. Maybe they're not doing it because there's a standards gap. Maybe there's a knowledge gap and we need training. Maybe it's because they're driven by other external processes. Maybe there's major projects, or maybe they want to cut corners, and that's not enabling them to do the things that they should be doing right now. Maybe there's current limitations that are not found in a specific document, right? So we've got to use we've got to use this context enterprise knowledge to design a better process. That's our future to be diagram, for example. So where there are these unanswered questions, we've got to put them in a discussion point, something we're going to talk about during a workshop, for example. So how can this organization improve the processes to address those pain points? What are the risks that are involved in these processes? And how can we as business analysts add value to the table? I mean, what is our purpose extracting all this information? It's usually to create change, to create a better environment through implementing change of some sort. So we've got to take the time to understand what this organization does today. And if possible, we've got to take the time to develop that overall high-level as-is process diagram like I showed you. We've got to be able to reference those standards. We've got to be able to include the requirements in that process. We've got to be able to publish the pain points and the gaps and so on and so forth, right? So we're always trying to optimize the performance of a process by creating those two forms of documents, those two forms of requirements documents, that as-is and that to-be diagram. We could also look at workshops. We could look at training. Once we build the diagram and we've realized what these pain points are and what the risks are involved, maybe there's some training that some of the employees need. So we've got to be able to plan for that. We've got to be able to test our to-be diagram. In the case of the to-be process diagram that I created, we were just in the process of implementing it before I left the company because my contract was up. If you're going to prepare for a workshop, make sure you've got all your materials available, right? Your printed pens or Post-it notes and so on and so forth, your whiteboards, your flip chart paper and all that kind of stuff. If it's the case of training that you need, you've got to be prepared to do the training on those processes from the beginning to the end. But most importantly, you really have to be able to document thoroughly everyone's comments in that workshop. You know, you've got to create those parking lot items, you've got to document those risks and so on and so forth. This is a time-consuming activity and probably quite boring for most people. And that's probably why, like Ian mentioned, people want to skip the planning side and just go straight to creating that field. But you've got to be able to understand why you're creating that field. And that's what this process, this workshop process of extracting that information from users and asking those pertinent questions like we found in Howard Podesso's book. That's this process that has to be done, unfortunately, no matter how painful it is. And in doing so, you're obviously just demonstrating the value that you're bringing by being able to document this knowledge. All right, so very quickly, we've answered a few questions. I mean, why do we need business models? When do we need them? And how do we build those processes, right? So building process modeling, it helps you to understand what the problem is, what the opportunity is that we're trying to solve and why. And it helps us understand what that impact or what that benefit of making that change is. I just want to briefly explain, this is my contact information. I've got a link to Aivaz Consulting website, my LinkedIn and email account. And I also run a YouTube and podcast show called The Inquisitive Analyst. I've had Sandy on it. I've had Ian Gotts on it as well. And I chat with BAs and project managers about the triumphs and challenges in their fields. So thank you very much, folks. If there are any questions, I'm more than open to answer them. I want to see if there's anything else that I have to show you. No, I think that's it. Yep.
Marcus, thank you. That was very, very thorough, and yeah, I pulled a lot from this. I just want to check with our team. Are there some questions that we've got from Marcus?